Dad, Simone thinks it's best if you sit this one out. That's how my son told me I wasn't welcome at my own family's dinner table. Not angry, not shouting, just calm, like he was telling me the weather might turn. I stood in my kitchen holding the phone a long moment before I could make myself answer. My name is Grady Holcomb. I'm 78. Retired shoe store owner, Roanoke, Virginia. And the night my son uninvited me from dinner was the same night a stranger walked through his front door holding a piece of paper that changed everything about how his wife looked at me from that moment forward. Sit what one out, Doug. The dinner Friday. Simone's boss is coming. Well, my boss now too, since the promotion. It's a big deal for us, Dad. And I'm not fit to be at it. He didn't answer that directly, which was its own kind of answer. It's not that, Dad. It's just, you know how you get. The stories about the shoe shop, the coupon thing at restaurants, the truck. Simone just wants tonight to go smooth. I'd driven that truck for 11 years. Paid it off in cash, same as I'd paid off everything in my life, one careful dollar at a time. The same way I'd built a shoe store that fed this family for 3 decades before I finally retired. Apparently, that story wasn't the kind Simone wanted told at her dinner table. I understand, I said, though I didn't, not really. You're not mad. I said I understand, Doug. That's not the same thing. I hung up before he could hear whatever was actually happening in my voice. I sat in my recliner that whole evening, the television on but not really watching anything. Thinking about every Thanksgiving, every birthday, every ordinary Sunday dinner I'd shown up to over the years without anyone ever once suggesting I might not be fit for the room. Something had shifted since the promotion. Simone's family had money, the kind that showed in the cars in her parents' driveway and the school her and Doug's kids attended. I think, somewhere along the way, my son had started measuring our whole family against that yardstick and finding his own father's plain, careful life coming up short by comparison. Friday evening came. I stayed home, same recliner, same television, telling myself it didn't matter. A man my age should be past caring what a room full of near strangers thought of his truck. I was still telling myself that around 7 o'clock when my phone rang. It was Doug, and his voice sounded nothing like it had 3 days earlier. Dad, I need you to come over. Right now. Doug, I thought I wasn't invited. Dad, please. Something's happened. There's a man here asking for you specifically, and I don't know what to tell him. I asked what kind of man. He says he's a lawyer. He's got some kind of legal document, Dad, and he's asking for Grady Holcomb by name. He won't leave it with anyone else. My chest went tight, though I couldn't have told you exactly why yet. I drove over. The house was full when I arrived, cars lining both sides of the street. Simone's boss's sedan parked crooked in the driveway like whoever drove it had been in a hurry to arrive and impress somebody. I walked in through the front door, and the dinner conversation stopped cold the second I stepped into that room. Simone's face, I remember clearly, went through several colors in quick succession. Standing near the dining table, looking distinctly out of place among the good china and the expensive wine, was a man in a gray suit holding a leather folder against his chest. Mr. Holcomb? He asked, looking directly at me. Grady Holcomb? That's me. My name is Aldous Fenwick. I represent the estate of Walter Holcomb. The room went very quiet. Walter was my older brother. We hadn't spoken in almost 20 years, ever since a falling out over our father's old hardware business that neither of us had ever managed to properly heal from. I knew he'd moved out west decades ago, built something out there, though I never asked what, and he never offered. Walter passed away 3 weeks ago, Fenwick said. I've been trying to locate you for the will reading. This was the only address I had on file, through an old piece of correspondence in his records. I felt the room tilt slightly around me. My brother's dead? I'm very sorry for your loss, Mr. Holcomb. I didn't say anything for a long moment. 20 years of silence, and somehow, standing in my son's dining room in front of people I barely knew, was where I finally learned my own brother was gone. Fenwick opened the folder. Mr. Holcomb, your brother built a hardware and lumber supply business over the past 3 decades. 14 locations across 3 states. He never married, no children. His will names you as sole beneficiary of the entire estate. The room went completely silent. Simone's boss set down his wine glass slowly. How much are we discussing? Doug asked, his voice strange, tight. Roughly $11 million, before final accounting, Fenwick said. Along with full ownership of the business itself, should Mr. Holcomb choose to keep it running rather than sell. I don't think I breathed for a full 10 seconds. Simone, standing near the head of the table where I would have sat if I'd actually been invited, made a small, strangled sound, something between a cough and a word that never quite formed. Nobody at that table said anything for a long moment. "Dad," Doug finally said, "you never told us you had a brother." "You never asked," I said quietly. "None of you ever asked much about my life before this family, truth be told." Fenwick, sensing the room's sudden tension, suggested we handle the formal paperwork another day, somewhere quieter, and made his exit as gracefully as a man could manage under those particular circumstances. I stood there a moment in that dining room, in the exact spot Simone had decided, 3 days earlier, wasn't fit for my presence. "Grady," Simone said, finally finding her voice, "please sit down. There's room." I looked at the table. There was, in fact, an empty chair, tucked in near the corner, clearly set up in case I'd shown up uninvited and needed somewhere out of the way to sit. "I think I'll head home," I said. "It's been a long evening." "Dad, please," Doug said. "Stay? We want you here. 3 days ago, you didn't." Nobody had an answer for that. I drove home that night with the truck's old engine rattling comfortably around me, the same truck Simone had apparently found so embarrassing, and sat in my driveway a long while before actually going inside, letting the whole evening settle into something I could actually understand. My brother gone. A fortune I never asked for, never expected, landing in my lap the exact same week my own family decided my presence wasn't worth the awkwardness it might cause in front of important company. Doug called the next morning, and the morning after that, and the one after that too. I let most of them go to voicemail those first few days, not out of spite exactly, more because I genuinely needed the quiet to think clearly about what any of it actually meant. When I finally did call him back, for days later, his voice sounded different, humbled in a way I hadn't heard from him since he was young enough to still need my help with things that actually mattered. "Dad, I've been thinking a lot since that night," he said, "about how Simone and I have been treating you. It wasn't fair, and it wasn't right, and I don't want you thinking any different treatment now is because of the money." "Is it because of the money?" I asked honestly. He was quiet for a moment. "I want to say no. I think, if I'm being completely honest, some of it probably is, at least at first. But Dad, sitting with it these past few days, I keep thinking about how easily we decided you weren't worth the awkwardness. That's not about money. That's about who we let ourselves become without really noticing." It was the most honest thing my son had said to me in longer than I wanted to admit. I met with Fenwick the following week and decided, after careful thought, to keep Walter's business running rather than sell it outright, hiring an experienced operations manager to handle daily affairs while I stayed involved from a distance, the same careful, hands-on way I'd run my own shoe store for 30 years. I also set up a modest scholarship fund in Walter's name for kids from working families who needed help affording trade school, the kind of practical education neither Walter nor I ever had the luxury of pursuing ourselves at that age. It's been about 6 months now. Doug and Simone invite me to dinner every single week now. No exceptions, no excuses. Simone, to her credit, apologized properly, not just for that particular evening, but for a pattern of small dismissals I don't think she'd ever really examined until that night forced her to. I still drive the old truck. Nobody's mentioned it being a problem since. Last Sunday, sitting at that same dining table, this time with an actual seat waiting for me at the center rather than tucked awkwardly in a corner, my grandson asked me to tell the story about the shoe shop again. The one about the Christmas Eve I stayed open 2 extra hours for a mother who couldn't afford new boots any earlier in the week. I told it slowly, the way I always do, and this time, everyone at that table actually listened, all the way to the end. Some inheritances, I've learned, aren't really about the money at all. Sometimes they're just the thing that finally makes people stop and actually see you, after years of looking straight through you instead. If this story got to you, hit like, drop a comment, and subscribe for more. I'll see you in the next one.